The morning I ended my 19-year marriage, a woman I had never met knocked on my door carrying a loaf of warm bread, and somehow that frightened me more than signing the papers. 3 minutes earlier, I had been sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at my name beneath a line of legal language that reduced nearly 2 decades of marriage to property, dates, and signatures. Claire Bennett. My hand looked strangely steady as I signed. Outside, November rain silvered the windows, and the maple tree beside the driveway had lost almost every leaf. Daniel had moved out 4 months earlier. His coffee mug was gone. His running shoes were gone. Even the ridiculous brass lamp he loved was gone. Yet the house still seemed arranged around his absence. I set down the pen and looked at my left hand. A pale band circled my ring finger where gold had rested for 19 years. Daniel had betrayed our marriage, but that wasn't the thought that hurt most. It was something he'd said during our last quiet conversation. "You haven't been yourself in years, Claire." I had wanted to hate him for saying it. Instead, the words followed me through empty rooms because some part of me knew they were true. I had become excellent at being reasonable, dependable, pleasant. I designed beautiful rooms for other people while slowly disappearing inside my own. I folded the papers, slid them into the envelope, and heard 3 knocks at the front door. I almost ignored them. Then came another knock, softer this time. I crossed the hallway and opened the door. A woman stood beneath my porch light, rain shining across the shoulders of her navy coat. She looked somewhere in her early 40s, with chestnut hair tucked loosely behind one ear and clear gray-blue eyes. In both hands she held a loaf of bread wrapped in a white kitchen towel. Steam still carried the faint scent of yeast and rosemary into the cold air. "Hi," she said. "I'm Nora. Nora Whitmore. I just moved into the house next door." I glanced toward the neighboring cottage, where a moving truck had appeared yesterday. "I'm Claire." "I know," she said, then smiled when my eyebrows lifted. "Your mailbox." "Right. My brilliant detective work." Laughed before I could stop myself. The sound surprised me. Nora held out the bread. "Peace offering from the new neighbor. It's sourdough, rosemary and sea salt. Still warm apparently," I said. "Very warm." I underestimated the walk from my kitchen to your porch. I reached for it, and our fingers touched through the towel for barely a second. Nothing dramatic happened. No Sander. No revelación. Just warmth. Simple, unexpected warmth on a morning that had felt cold everywhere else. "Thank you," I said. Nora studied my face for half a heartbeat, as if she noticed something I hadn't successfully hidden. But she didn't ask. "I'm 2 doors away if you ever need anything." Then she stepped back into the rain. I closed the door and carried the bread into my kitchen. When I unfolded the towel, a small cream-colored card slipped onto the counter. 6 handwritten words waited beneath Nora's name. "For whatever kind of morning you're having." I stood there with my divorce papers 6 inches away and warm bread between my hands, and for the first time that morning I cried. For the next 3 days, I told myself Nora Whitmore was simply a kind neighbor who happened to make dangerously good bread. I repeated that explanation every morning while slicing the sourdough and watching butter disappear into its warm, uneven surface. By Friday, only the heel remained, along with the little cream-colored card I had somehow failed to throw away. I kept it beside the coffee maker, which was ridiculous. At 47, I should have been beyond assigning meaning to handwritten notes from strangers. Still, when I noticed movement through my kitchen window, my attention followed it. Nora was crossing the sidewalk carrying a wooden sign toward a narrow storefront at the corner. I recognized the building. It had been empty since the florist closed 2 years earlier. A temporary sign covered the front window. "Harbor and Grain. Artisan Bakery. Opening soon." So that explained the bread. 10 minutes later, I was standing outside with Nora's freshly washed kitchen towel folded under my arm, pretending curiosity had nothing to do with my decision. Through the glass, I saw her balanced on a small ladder, trying to position the wooden sign against an exposed brick wall. The room smelled like sawdust, coffee, and something sweet baking somewhere in back. Nora noticed me and smiled. "Claire, you found me." I held up the towel. "Returning stolen property." I thought that was a gift. The bread was. "I am keeping that." "Good choice." She climbed down and accepted the towel. In daylight, she seemed different from the woman on my rainy porch. More animated. More at home. Rolls of blueprints covered a work table, and half-painted shelves lined one wall. I looked toward the ceiling automatically. The pendant lights were beautiful, but something about their placement bothered me. Your contractor put those 6 inches too far forward, I said. Nora followed my gaze. You can tell that from here? I am an interior designer. Or I was before I started spending most of my time choosing neutral paint for people afraid of color. She laughed softly. Then please tell me whether I am about to spend $12,000 making this place look terrible. 20 minutes became an hour. I moved through the bakery pointing out sight lines, counter placement, and how the morning sun would hit the front tables. Nora listened without interrupting. Really listened. Daniel used to ask my opinion and then explain why his was better. I had forgotten how different attention could feel when it was not waiting for its turn to speak. We ended up sitting on unopened flour sacks with paper cups of coffee between us. Nora glanced at my bare left hand. Married? She asked. The question landed gently, but I still rubbed the pale circle on my finger. Not anymore. Signed the final papers Wednesday morning. Her expression changed not to pity but recognition. I am sorry. I shrugged. I am not sure whether I am. Nora looked down at her coffee. Me neither, she said. Something in her voice made me pause. You were married? She lifted her eyes to mine. Once. Before I could ask anything else, rain tapped suddenly against the storefront windows. Nora turned toward the darkening street, and whatever door had briefly opened between us quietly closed again. She stood and reached for the blueprints. I should let you get back to your life. I almost told her I was not entirely sure what my life was anymore. Instead, I picked up my coat. At the door, Nora called my name. When I turned, she was holding a small paper bag. Breakfast, she said. Considerate payment for saving me from $12,000 of bad lighting. I carried it home through the rain, strangely aware that for the first time since Daniel left, I was curious about someone else's past instead of trapped inside my own. By Sunday afternoon, the rain had become the kind coastal Maine residents stopped calling weather and started calling trouble. Wind pushed sheets of water against my windows, and the harbor disappeared behind a gray curtain. I was halfway through reheating soup when my phone lit up with a message from Nora. Do you know anything about windows? I smiled despite myself. Only how to make them look expensive. Her reply came immediately. That might still be more useful than what I know. Harbor and Grain was only a 5-minute walk away, but I drove because the temperature had dropped into the low 40s. When I arrived, Nora was standing inside the bakery surrounded by towels and buckets. Water had found its way around one of the front window frames, leaving a steady stream running toward the unfinished hardwood floor. You came, she said. You sounded desperate. I was trying for casually inconvenienced. You missed. For the next hour we moved furniture, rolled up rugs, and built a ridiculous barrier from towels while Nora called her contractor. He could not reach us until morning. Then my phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Several streets near the harbor were flooding. Residents were advised to stay where they were. Nora read the message over my shoulder. Well, she said, looking toward the rain. I suppose you are officially trapped in a bakery. There are worse places, especially if there is food. That earned the laugh I had already started recognizing, low and warm and completely unguarded. The power went out 20 minutes later. Everything became quiet except the rain. Nora found candles in the office and placed them along the counter. The ovens had been shut down earlier, but the kitchen still held their warmth. She made coffee on a small gas camping stove left by the contractors, and we sat at a table near the back, wrapped in old wool blankets from her car. Candlelight softened the unfinished room. Flour dust floated through the air like pale snow. We talked about harmless things at first. Favorite movies. Bad first jobs. The embarrassing haircut I had at 23. Nora confessed that she once drove 6 hours for a concert, only to discover she had bought tickets for the wrong date. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. It startled me how natural it felt. I had spent months measuring every emotion against the divorce. With Nora, for a few minutes I forgot to measure anything. Then she became quiet. What? I asked. Nothing. That was clearly not true. Nora turned her mug between her palms. You look different when you laugh. I felt unexpectedly self-conscious. Different how? Lighter. The word settled between us. I looked toward the dark windows, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. Maybe it was the candles. Maybe it was the storm making the rest of the world feel impossibly far away. When I looked back, Nora was still watching me. There was no pity in her expression. No careful concern reserved for the recently divorced. It was something quieter. Something I could not name without making the room feel different. My heartbeat quickened anyway. I stood too fast and carried my empty cup toward the counter. Behind me, Nora said softly, "Claire, are you all right?" Yes. The answer came automatically. Then I stopped. Rain hammered the roof. Candle flames trembled along the walls. I turned toward her and tried again. "I do not know." Nora nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. She did not come closer. Somehow, that made me notice the distance between us even more. The storm kept us inside Harbor and Grain until well past midnight, and sometime after the second cup of coffee, the silence between Nora and me stopped feeling awkward. It began to feel safe. She found a battery lantern in the storage room and set it on the table between us. The pale light caught the flower on her sleeve and the tiredness around her eyes. Outside, rain rushed along the gutters while the wind rattled the old storefront windows. I pulled the wool blanket tighter around my shoulders. Nora studied her coffee. "You asked me something Friday," she said. I remembered immediately. "About being married." She nodded. I waited. 11 years, she said. That surprised me. I had imagined something shorter, although I had no reason to. Was the divorce recent? Nora looked toward the dark bakery. Not exactly. There was something carefully closed in her expression, and I recognized it because I had worn the same look for months. I could have left the subject alone. Instead, I heard myself say, "Daniel and I were married 19 years. I thought that made us permanent." Nora looked back at me. What happened? The question was simple. I stared into my cup. He fell in love with someone else. Saying it no longer felt sharp. Just heavy. She was younger than me. For a while I thought that was the whole story. Then I realized I had been disappearing long before she arrived. Nora said nothing, so I kept going. I stopped painting the dining room the color I wanted because Daniel preferred beige. I stopped taking weekend trips because he hated driving. I stopped playing music while I cooked because he liked quiet. None of those things seemed important alone. Together they became my life. The rain softened slightly. Nora leaned forward, her hands around her mug. "What color did you want?" I blinked. "What?" "The dining room." I smiled. "Deep green. Almost the color of pine trees after rain." "That sounds beautiful." Daniel said it would make the room too dark. Maybe Daniel was wrong. The certainty in her voice made me laugh softly. Then I noticed she was smiling too. Something loosened inside me. "What about you?" I asked. "What did marriage make you give up?" Nora's smile faded. For several seconds only the rain answered. Then she said, "It did not." That was the problem. I waited. Nora drew a slow breath. "Rebecca never asked me to become smaller. She made me believe I could take up more space." The name caught my attention first. Rebecca. I looked at Nora, trying to understand why my mind had paused there. I had assumed. Nora saw the realization arrive before I found words. Her expression remained gentle. "Rebecca was my wife, Claire." The bakery seemed suddenly quieter. I felt foolish for being surprised, then more foolish for caring that I was surprised. "Oh," I said. Nora gave me a small smile. That is usually where people ask whether they heard me correctly. "I heard you." "Good." She looked down at her hands. I wanted to ask what happened to Rebecca, but another question had risen inside me, one I was not ready to examine. It had nothing to do with Nora's marriage and everything to do with the way I had noticed her looking at me earlier. Nora stood and carried our cups toward the sink. As she passed, she stopped a few feet away. "Claire, you are allowed to be confused." I looked up. "About what?" Her eyes held mine. "Whatever you are trying very hard not to think about." Heat climbed into my face, but her voice stayed kind. She did not move closer. "You just ended a marriage," she said. "I am not going to become the answer to a question you have not even asked yourself yet." Then she walked toward the kitchen, leaving me beside the lantern with the storm fading outside and a new, unsettling thought growing quietly inside me. For the first time, I wondered whether the life I had lost was not the only life I had never allowed myself to imagine. For 3 days after the storm, Nora gave me exactly what she had promised without ever saying the words. Space. No questions. No knowing looks. No attempt to explain what I was feeling before I understood it myself. Somehow that made me think about her more. On Tuesday morning, I found a paper bag on my porch containing 2 cranberry scones and a note that said the bakery required independent quality control. On Wednesday, I spent my lunch break correcting the placement of her display shelves. By Friday, I was sitting on the floor of Harbor and Grain at 7 in the evening, surrounded by paint samples while Nora argued passionately for a shade of white that looked identical to 6 other shades of white. "You mocked my profession," I said. "I am asking for professional guidance. You called these all white. They are all white." I stared at her until she laughed. That laugh was becoming. Dangerous, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because I had started waiting for it. We settled into a rhythm I never planned. Before work, I stopped by the bakery for coffee. After work, I helped with lighting, furniture, and the deep green accent wall Nora chose after remembering what I had said about my dining room. When I noticed the color, I stood silently in front of it. Nora appeared beside me. "Too dark?" she asked. "Perfect," I said. The next weekend, she taught me how to shape bread dough. Mine looked like a deflated football. Nora's was smooth and round. "You are enjoying this too much," I told her. "A little." Flour dusted my cheek when I pushed my hair back. Nora reached toward me, then hesitated. "You have something there." Before I could wipe it away, she brushed the flour from my cheek with her fingertips. The touch lasted barely a second. Still, the room seemed to narrow around it. Nora lowered her hand. "Sorry. Do not be," I said too quickly. Her eyes met mine. Neither of us moved. I became aware of the refrigerator humming behind us, the scent of rosemary from the cooling loaves, the warmth from the ovens. Nora's expression changed, almost imperceptibly. Softer. Questioning. My heartbeat answered before I could. Then my phone rang. Daniel. His name filled the screen between us like a door swinging open to another life. I stepped back. I should answer. "Of course," Nora said. Daniel wanted to discuss the house. "Nothing urgent," he insisted. But his voice carried the familiar assumption that my time remained available to him. When the call ended, Nora was stacking baking sheets. Something had shifted. I hated that I had caused it. I walked closer. "Nora." She kept her attention on the counter. "You do not owe me an explanation." "I know." That was not what I wanted to say. She finally looked at me. I swallowed. "I do not know what this is." Her face remained calm. "Neither do I." That surprised me. "I thought you did." Nora smiled faintly. "Knowing who I love does not mean I always know what someone else feels." The simplicity of that sentence followed me home. That night, I stood in my dining room staring at beige walls I had disliked for 19 years. Opened my laptop and ordered a gallon of deep green paint. Then I looked at my phone at Nora's name, and finally admitted the question I had been avoiding. I was no longer wondering whether I noticed her. I was wondering what might happen if I stopped pretending I did not. The gallon of deep green paint arrived Saturday morning, and by noon I had covered half the dining room wall when Daniel pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window as he stepped from his car carrying a cardboard box. For 19 years, I could recognize his mood by the way he closed a car door. That afternoon I realized I no longer wanted to. He stopped when he entered the dining room. "Green," he said. Very observant. "You always wanted green." I rolled paint onto the wall. "Yes." He looked around as if the house had begun changing without permission. "I found some documents for the mortgage transfer," he said. "We should talk about whether you are keeping this place." "I am keeping it. Claire, it is a lot of house for one person." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Nora stood outside holding 2 coffees and a small paper bag. Her smile faded when she noticed Daniel behind me. "That time?" "No," I said, perhaps too quickly. Daniel stepped closer. I introduced them. Nora was polite. Daniel was polite. Somehow that was worse. His eyes moved from the coffee in Nora's hand to the green wall, then to me. Understanding appeared slowly across his face. Nora noticed it too. "I will leave these here," she said. "I will see you later." After the door closed, Daniel remained silent. "Do not," I warned. "I have not said anything." "Your face has." He exhaled. "Are you and Nora together?" "No." Then he made the mistake of asking whether I was experimenting. The word irritated me more than I expected. I am 47 years old, Daniel. I am not a teenager trying on identities in front of a mirror. I did not mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? He looked toward the wall. For once he seemed uncertain. I spent years thinking you had stopped loving me because I had failed somehow. Then I thought maybe there was someone else. There was not. I know. His voice softened. Maybe there was Claire. Maybe you just had not met her yet. The room went still. I hated how deeply the sentence landed. Daniel left 20 minutes later, and I sat on the kitchen floor beside an unopened can of paint, crying for reasons I could not separate. A knock came sometime after sunset. Nora. She took one look at me and asked no questions. She simply sat beside me on the floor. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I told her what Daniel had said. Nora listened. What if he is right? I whispered. About what? About me. About all those years. Nora shook her head. Claire, discovering something new about yourself does not make your old life a lie. I looked at her. She was close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of gray in her blue eyes. My breathing slowed. I wanted to close the small distance between us. The realization came with startling clarity. Nora must have seen it because she became very still. I leaned toward her then stopped. Not because I did not want to, because I did. Too much and for reasons I could not yet trust. I cannot do this because Daniel hurt me, I said. Nora's expression softened. Good. I swallowed. That is not exactly the response I expected. She smiled. If you ever choose me, Claire, I want you to know you are choosing me, not escaping him. She stood and offered me her hand. I took it. When she left, I returned to the dining room and finished painting the wall alone. By midnight, every trace of beige was gone. The week before Harbor and Grain opened, Nora and I became careful with each other. Not distant. Careful. We still shared coffee before sunrise and argued about chair placement, but neither of us mentioned that moment on my kitchen floor. I told myself it was healthy, mature. Then Tuesday evening, while helping Nora clear the bakery storage room, I found the box. It was tucked behind old mixing bowls, plain cardboard softened at the corners. I lifted it from a shelf, and the bottom nearly opened. Envelopes spilled across the floor. Nora, I called. Then I saw the name written across one envelope in faded blue ink. Rebecca. I should have looked away. I meant to. But beneath the name was a date from 3 years earlier and 4 words written. In Nora's handwriting. Her last birthday letter. Nora appeared in the doorway and stopped. For 1 second she looked like someone had opened a room she had spent years keeping closed. I am sorry, I said. The box almost fell. She knelt and gathered the letters slowly. I handed her the one I was holding. Nora sat back against the wall. Rebecca did not leave me, she said. Her voice was quiet. She died 3 years ago. The words changed the air around us. I lowered myself beside her. Nora stared at the envelope. She had cancer. We had almost a year after the diagnosis. Long enough to say everything important. Not long enough for any of it to feel finished. I thought about every time Nora had avoided explaining her marriage. Suddenly her silences had shape. I am so sorry. She nodded, then looked toward the bakery kitchen. The rosemary sourdough was hers. Rebecca's favorite. I stopped making it after she died. My chest tightened. Until? Nora met my eyes. Until the morning I met you. I remembered the warm loaf against my palms, the handwritten card. The kindness I had believed was casual. Why me? I asked. Nora gave a small sad smile. I saw you through the window when I was carrying boxes into my house. You were sitting alone at your kitchen table. You looked like you were trying very hard not to fall apart. Something in me wanted to make bread again. The answer should have comforted me. Instead, fear rose before I could stop it. So I reminded you of her? Nora's expression changed. No. Are you sure? Claire. You made the same bread for your wife, then after 3 years you made it for me. What am I supposed to think? Nora stood. That I trusted you with something that mattered. I stood too. Or that I walked into a place Rebecca left empty. Hurt crossed her face. I regretted the words immediately. That is not fair, she said. I know. But I need to know whether you see me when you look at me. Nora was silent long enough to make my stomach sink. Then she said, I see you more clearly than you realize. But I cannot prove that while you are afraid of what loving me might mean about your past. The bakery suddenly felt too small. I reached for my coat. Claire, she said. I stopped but did not turn around. Maybe we both need to know we are choosing what comes next, she whispered, not replacing what came before. I walked home beneath a cold, clear sky. The next morning my porch was empty. No paper bag. No loaf. No note. I stood there longer than I want to admit, finally understanding how quickly a small kindness had become part of the shape of my days. For 6 mornings nothing appeared on my porch. I discovered how loud absence could be when it arrived quietly. I still woke before 7. I still made coffee. But instead of looking toward Nora's house, I made myself look inward. On Thursday, Daniel and I met at the bank and signed the final transfer papers. The house was officially mine. When the clerk congratulated me, I almost laughed at the strange choice of word. Outside, Daniel stood beside me beneath a bright December sky. You seem different, he said. I thought about the green dining room, the bakery, Nora, and the woman I had been before. 19 years of compromise taught me to distrust my own wants. I am trying to be, I said. Daniel nodded. For the first time, I did not need him to understand more than that. That evening, I opened the hall closet and took down the wedding photographs I had hidden there after he left. I expected anger. Instead, I felt tenderness for the younger woman smiling beside him. She had not been foolish. She had loved with the knowledge she possessed then. I placed the photographs inside an archival box and carried them upstairs. I did not throw them away. I did not need to erase a life to begin another. The next morning I walked into the room Daniel once used as his home office. It still held his old desk and 2 empty bookshelves. By noon the desk was in the garage. By sunset, I had spread my design sketches across the floor. On Saturday I bought an easel. I had not painted seriously since my 30s. My first attempt was terrible. The second was worse. I laughed anyway. Over the next few days I worked on the room until it felt unmistakably mine. Warm lamps. An old leather chair. Shelves filled with design books. One wall painted the same deep green as the dining room. I began waking with ideas instead of memories. I called 2 former clients and accepted a residential project I would once have declined because Daniel disliked how much weekend work it required. I drove to the coast alone and walked nearly 3 miles beside the freezing Atlantic, letting the wind turn my cheeks pink. Nora remained nearby, but I did not go to the bakery. I needed to know something first. Did I miss her because she had filled the silence Daniel left behind? Or because she was Nora? The answer came unexpectedly one night while I was painting. I remembered Nora laughing over 6 nearly identical shades of white. I remembered how she listened without waiting to speak. I remembered the restraint in her voice when she told me she would not become an answer I had not earned for myself. None of those memories belonged to Daniel. None belonged to Rebecca. They belonged to us. I set down my brush and finally understood what had frightened me. Nora had never asked me to become someone new for her. She had simply made enough room for me to hear myself again. I did not need her to rescue me. I had signed the papers, painted the walls, reclaimed my work, and learned how to sit alone without feeling abandoned. I could build a life without Nora. The realization should have made letting her go easier. Instead, it made my choice clear. I wanted her in the life I was building. The next morning, I saw the Harbor and Grain opening announcement taped inside the bakery window. Saturday, 8 o'clock. I stood across the street reading it twice. Nora had not invited me. I went home, opened my studio, and pulled a clean piece of cedar from the stack beside my work table. For the first time since our argument, I knew exactly what I wanted to make. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, with sunlight turning the harbor into hammered silver. I reached Harbor and Grain 10 minutes before opening, carrying the cedar sign beneath my arm. Through the window, I saw Nora arranging pastries behind the counter. She looked up. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Then she unlocked the door. Claire. I swallowed. I made you something. Placed the sign on the counter and turned it toward her. Harbor and Grain. Beneath the name I had carved a smaller line. Some things rise after they have been broken open. Nora traced the letters with her fingertips. Her eyes filled, but she smiled. That sounds like something a baker would say. Actually, it sounds like something a recently divorced interior designer would say after ruining 3 pieces of cedar. She laughed, and hearing that sound again nearly undid me. I'm sorry, I said. For what I said about Rebecca. I was afraid. Nora nodded slowly. So was I. I thought loving someone again might mean leaving her behind. Does not, I said. Nora looked at me. I know that now. I took a breath. I know something too. I can live alone. I can keep my house, paint terrible paintings, choose ridiculous green walls, and build a life that belongs entirely to me. Nora's smile trembled. That sounds like a good life. It is. I stepped closer. But I want you in it. Not because Daniel left. Not because I am trying to become someone different. And not because you saved me. You did not. You reminded me there was still someone here worth finding. Nora's eyes stayed on mine. Claire, Rebecca was the great love of one chapter of my life. I will always carry her. I understand. But you are not standing in her place. Her voice softened. You are standing somewhere new. The bakery around us smelled of coffee, rosemary, and warm bread. Outside, the first customers were gathering near the door. I smiled through tears. Your opening is about to become very awkward. Let them wait 10 seconds. Nora reached for my hand. I met her halfway. When we kissed, it was gentle and brief. Less like a beginning written in fireworks and more like finally arriving somewhere we had both chosen carefully. 1 year later, I woke on a snowy December morning to the smell of rosemary sourdough drifting upstairs. My studio was filled with paintings now. Harbor and Grain had expanded into the storefront next door. Nora still kept Rebecca's letters. I still kept my wedding photographs. We had learned that healing did not require destroying evidence that we had loved before. Downstairs, Nora stood at my kitchen counter cutting a warm loaf while morning light spilled across the deep green dining room walls. She looked up and smiled. Coffee? Always. I walked toward her and understood something I wish I had known at 47, sitting alone with divorce papers beneath my hands. Sometimes healing is not forgetting the life you lost. Sometimes it is becoming brave enough to make room for the life that comes next. Thank you for spending this story with us. If it brought you comfort, hope, or reminded you that new beginnings can arrive at any age, please subscribe to the channel and share this story with someone who might need it today. And wherever you are in your own story, thank you for listening.